HarperCollins presents The Evacuee Christmas by Katie King. Read by Helen Keeley. Chapter 1. The shadows were starting to lengthen as twins Connie and Jessie made their way back home. They felt quite grown up these days, as a week earlier it had been their 10th birthday, and their mother, Barbara, had iced a cake, and there'd been a raucous tea party at home for family and their close friends, with party games and paper hats. The party had ended in the parlour, with Barbara bashing out songs on the old piano, and everyone having a good old sing-song. What a lot of fun it had been, even though, by bedtime, Connie felt queasy from eating too much cake, and Jessie had a sore throat the following morning from yelling out the words to the Lambeth Walk with far too much vigour. On the twins' iced Victoria sponge, Barbara had carefully piped Connie's name in cerise icing with loopy lettering, and delicately traced small yellow and baby pink flowers above it. Then Barbara had thoroughly washed out her metal icing gun and got to work writing Jessie's name below his sister's on the lower half of the cake. This time, Barbara chose to work in boxy dark blue capitals, with a sailboat on some choppy turquoise and deep blue waves, carefully worked in contrasting coloured icing as the decoration below his name, Jessie being very sensitive about his name and the all-too-common assumption, for people who hadn't met him but only knew him by the name Jessie, that he was a girl. If she cared to think about it, which she tried not to, Barbara heartily regretted that Ted had talked her into giving their only son as his Christian name, the Ross family name of Jessie, which, as tradition would have it, was passed down to the firstborn male in each new generation of Rosses. It wasn't even spelt Jesse, as it usually was if naming a boy, because, Ross family tradition again,Jessie was on the earlier birth certificates of those other Jessies and in the family Bible that lay on the sideboard in the parlour at Ted's elder brother's house. And so Jessie was how it had to be for all the future Ross generations to come. Ted had told Barbara what an honour it was to be called Jessie, and Barbara, still weak from the exertions of the birth, had allowed herself to be talked into believing her husband. She must have still looked a little dubious, though, as then Ted pointed out that his own elder brother, Jessie, was a gruff-looking giant with huge arms and legs, and nobody had ever dared tease him about his name. It was going to be just the same for their newborn son, Ted promised. Big Jessie, as Ted's brother had become known since the birth of his nephew, was in charge of the maintenance of several riverboats on the River Thames, Ted working alongside him. And Big Jessie, with his massive bulk, could single-handedly fill virtually all of the kitchen hearth in his and his wife Val's modest, terraced house that backed onto the Bermondsey Street, where Ted and Barbara raised their children in their own, almost identical red brick house. Barbara could see why nobody in their right mind would mess with Big Jessie, even though those who knew him soon discovered that his bruiser looks belied his gentle nature, as he was always mild of manner and slow to anger with a surprisingly soft voice. Sadly, it had proved to be a whole different story for young Jessie, who had turned out exactly as Barbara had suspected he would all those years ago, when she lovingly gazed down at her newborn twins, with the hale and hearty Connie, named after Barbara's mother, Constance, dwarfing her more delicate-framed brother as they lay length to length, with their toes almost touching, and their heads away from each other in the beautifully crafted wooden crib Ted had made for the babies to sleep in. These days, Barbara could hardly bear to see how cruelly it all played out on the grubby streets on which the Ross family lived. To say it fair broke Barbara's heart was no exaggeration. While Connie was tall, tomboyish, and could easily pass for 12, and very possibly older, Jessie was smaller and more introverted, often looking a lot younger than he was. Barbara hated the way Jessie would shrink away from the bigger southeast London lads when they tussled him to the ground in their roughhouse games. All the boys had their faces rubbed in the dirt by the other lads at one time or another. Barbara knew and readily accepted that that was part and parcel of a child's life in the tangle of narrow and dingy streets they knew so well. But very few people had to endure quite the punishing that Jessie did with such depressing regularity.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?